Hello, everybody. Welcome to Esterbrook Rec Center, and thank you for coming out to the second of three City Council-sponsored public forums on the annual budget. My name is Chris Harsh. I represent Ward 13, which is where Esterbrook is located. I also will be introducing, as we go along, Councilwoman House, Councilwoman Moore, Councilwoman Santana, and Councilwoman Spencer, who are joining us tonight. And we're going to take turns going through this presentation on how the city budget works. And at the end, we'll be taking questions from everybody to answer any thoughts you have, questions or concerns about the budget, but also we'd really like to hear your input on where you think the budget can be improved, what sections you think need perhaps more investment, or where you think maybe we could cut back and pull back some of our spending. So to get us started, I'm just going to go through a very brief overview of the city budget. We'll go to here. So how a city budget gets approved. So there is an operations hearing which begin in the fall. We started these last year, where every single committee that oversees every aspect of Cleveland's governance, from transportation to municipal services to public safety, hears from all the directors and the heads of the departments one at a time in our regular weekly meetings. We receive updates and we talk about the goals for that department. The next thing that happens is the Mayor Bibb, delivers us an estimate of what he thinks the budget is going to look like for the next year. It's called the mayor's estimate, and it is a rough approximation of the budget that the mayor thinks is going to carry us through to the next year. It's usually based on last year's budget. Typically, things don't change wildly, so there's some adjustments within that budget from last year, but that is sent over to us on February 1st, and we in City Council then take this document and it becomes the people's budget. That's when we start to look at it and we start to read through it and we start to deliver our feedback through budget hearings. So we hold about 2 weeks of budget hearings every year. It's almost always in February. These are very long sessions. We have 12-hour days. Sometimes these can go to 7, 8 o'clock at night. But one at a time, we then talk to all the directors of various departments and we go through every single aspect of the budget with all members of council present, so that we really get voice and input from every single ward and from every single person on City Council. The next step is called reconciliation. This is where we make our permanent modifications, where we decide what departments we want to add to, what departments we want to subtract from. If there's particular positions that we don't think need to be in there, we will remove them. And then that's called the reconciliation process. We then put that forward to a vote of ourselves. City Council has to ultimately approve the final version of the city budget. So we do something in Cleveland called first reading, second reading, and third reading. We have to have reconciliation before the second reading because by law, the city budget has to sit for 10 days between second and third reading so that everybody, I guess this goes back to newspaper days, has a chance to get their paper copy and go through the whole thing and read it before it gets gavelled into law on the third reading. So the final process there is approval, which happens on a Monday night. Things to remember. We must run a balanced budget. We are not the state of Ohio or the federal government. We cannot have deficit spending in Cleveland. We can only spend what we have. We must pass it by April 1st. There is no way around that. If we don't, we get in big trouble with the state of Ohio, and nobody wants to find out what happens if we don't get the budget done. The state would have very big problems with us. And we also have different parts of our budget. There is a general fund, which is the money that most people talk about when they think of the budget. And there's the enterprise funds. The enterprise funds largely can be thought of as utilities. We've got the Cleveland Public Power, we've got the water department, the sewer department, and the airport, actually. These are funds that are separate from the rest of the general fund because any revenue raised by those departments goes back into that department and cannot be spent elsewhere. So the money you pay for your Cleveland Public Power bill, all that money stays in Cleveland Public Power. That money does not cross over and pay for libraries or street pavement or something like that. So the enterprise funds are handled separately from the general fund. And there's also the Community Development Block Grant. These are federal funds that come to the city of Cleveland every year. They come through HUD, which is a federal agency, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. These funds have special restrictions on how they can be spent, what they can be spent on. So we actually handle those in a separate budget process that takes about 3 days and is overseen, this year will be overseen by Councilman Anthony Hairston, who oversees the DPS committee. And that's a separate part of the budget as well. One more thing to remember, and I think we'll swap out then. The mayor recommends the budget, but the council approves the budget. And this is arguably our largest task of the year. Overseeing the purse strings for the city of Cleveland is our oversight responsibility. It's our job to make sure that money is being spent properly and wisely and with resident input, which is why we're here tonight. During budget season, we're always asking for feedback from people on where they think the budget could be improved, where they think it can be altered. And our job is to represent our wards in this budget so that when we're finished with this, what we have is the people's budget that represents all 17 wards in Cleveland and all 375,000 some odd residents. So that is my section of this. I'm going to call on Councilwoman House because she's sitting closest. I'm sorry, Councilwoman Spencer because she's second closest, and she can come up here and take the slideshow from there. All right.
Thank you, Councilman Harsh. It is a delight to do this collaboratively, and Councilwoman House Jones gave this presentation yesterday. So today we're teaming up in a different way, and we're all going to be available for questions after this session. But thanks for teeing that up, and thank you for hosting us in your ward. It is a delight to be here. I also want to add that I'm liking the ratio of council members tonight. We have 4 women council members to 1 guy. I'm just liking the feel of that. You know, shout out to all our gentlemen colleagues, but I'm really vibing off of this tonight. So this is great. We got some women power and we got Councilman Harsh. All right. So we are really wanting to talk about the general fund budget this evening. As mentioned, this is really the city's checkbook. When you think about the services that you need and expect as residents, the quality of life and the services that you just expect the city, things to run well so you can go about your life and flourish in the city of Cleveland, this is what we're talking about with the general fund. And we're going to be going into some details on that. So this year, as mentioned, the budget does have to be structurally balanced. And this year, at this moment, before council has taken a look at it, there are $778 million in expenditures anticipated for 2024. So this is, you know, again, what we anticipate at this point in time before going through budget hearings. And as you'll see in a future slide, most of this goes to our salaries for all of the hard work, all the workers in the city of Cleveland who make our city run. So they are the lifeblood of the city. So this is just giving you a sense of scale for, first of all, the revenue sources. And this is something that really surprised me when I first joined council, is how big a proportion income tax is of the city's revenues. So as you can see here, income tax is 63% of the overall general funds. When you think about your checking account and that inflow of dollars and what puts money in your bank account, a really big proportion is the income tax. And this is one of the reasons why we want to create neighborhoods where everyone wants to live, because we want to continue to attract individuals and families to the city where they can flourish and make a living and contribute to the city. And then here are all the other various pots of money. Property tax is a lot smaller proportion than probably what some people would expect. I think a lot of people are surprised that property tax is not a bigger slice of the income pie. I want to just call attention briefly to what's called the local government fund. That is a small piece of the pie that is from the state of Ohio. And Councilwoman House Jones, as a former state legislator, could of course give greater insights into the dynamics with our state house. But needless to say, I think those of us on council believe that the state needs to invest to a much greater degree in our cities. And in fact, at one point they did, and then decided that they wanted to really tighten that up and no longer contribute to our cities in the same way. So I think that Ohioans should be aware that the state of Ohio does not support its cities in as meaningful a way as it could. That's something I think we'd love to do more advocacy work around. So again, these are the various sources ranging from admissions tax, charges for services, investment income, etc. And then going to the uses size, the big orange part of the circle is the executive branch, right? So again, those city services that you need and deserve as citizens, as taxpayers. Council is the small light blue piece of the pie, that's your legislative branch of government, and then the judicial branch is the dark blue piece of the pie. And then we've got another beautiful pie to look at. And actually, I want to shout out our council colleague, Councilman Charlie Slife, who could not be here tonight, for putting these slides together and really visually representing the budget for our presentation. So shout out to you, Councilman Slife, for doing this. So this shows then when we're talking about the expense side. So how do we talked about how we get that revenue in the door. How are we putting money into our checking account? This is how, as it now stands, how we're proposing to spend it this year. And really, I think one of the things that stands out on this slide is showing you all what a big proportion of the budget public safety is. So public safety is over 50%. It's that big light blue part of this pie. It won't surprise you, public works. The next biggest size would be your snow removal, trash removal, parks and recreation, grass cutting, those kinds of services that are so necessary. Non-departmental, we can go into if you all want more detail about that. We actually have detailed breakout slides of all of this information. And so these are some of the bigger departments: law, finance, building and housing, and public health. And then some of the smaller departments, again, we have detail on if you'd like to see more. Most of the smaller departments are within what's called general government. So that would include things like the Department of Aging and other relatively small departments like the Community Relations Board, our Youth and Family Success, and Aging. This is essentially that same pie again, but just breaking out. Remember that big light blue piece that was the public safety piece? This just shows you how each component of public safety works. So police is 29.7, I can barely read, but I think I'm reading that correctly. Police is 29.7%. So again, we talked about public safety being over 50% of that entire general fund budget. Of that, police is 29.7, fire is 14.7, and emergency medical services is 4.7. So that's how we get to that big 50% for public safety. And the rest of this is the same pieces of the pie as you saw on the previous slide. Are we handing this off to anyone else? All right, Councilwoman.
You want to sit here?
I sure will.
Fill in the front.
Yes, let's fill in.
So good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing? Oh, y'all, Good evening, everybody. How y'all doing?
Good.
Yeah, I know it is late, and we're gonna eat some snacks and go home. And it's cold a little bit, but hi, I am Stephanie House Jones. I am the councilwoman for Cleveland's Ward 7. And so just really, as we are wrapping this up, before we get your feedback, as we talked about, the majority of our funding, specifically in our operating budget, goes to the people. 72% goes to the actual salaries and benefits for the city of Cleveland. This is a breakdown. When we look at the legislative branch, that 1.2%, 61 people propose for Cleveland City Council. When you look at the municipal court, which consists of the municipal court, clerk of courts, as well as the housing court, which I believe that's 426. Yes, 426 people. And then the executive branch. Councilwoman Spencer talked about all the branches in the administration that total 4,113 people, bringing the total to 4,600 people that are public servants here in the city of Cleveland, doing everything from public safety to the recreation that we have here, to our cameraman, our photographer, again, all of this stuff. It goes to people, and it's 72%. Of our budget. That equates to $562.5 million, and that's a lot of money. So, that's kind of basically our presentation. We thought this is very important for people to have, but we also wanted to hear back from you, right? This is the mayor's estimate. Beginning next week, him and his team, he will actually explain why he did what he did. And then we will have an opportunity to engage in that. We know if there are things that people want to say, well, we need more money in this department, then we need to understand from you, getting your suggestions, where are we going to take the money from, right? So this is, again, going back to Councilman Harsh's point, we have to have a balanced budget. if we take money away from a specific area, where would that money go to? So again, always remember, if you add money, you got to take it away. If you take money, you have to add it somewhere. And so, in this time that we have left with each other, we really want to hear from you and really think about, like, what do you see? Anything surprise you? You knew it all. You were expert. You have any ideas for us? That's what we're here for. As you said, the time is ticking now for us for that April 1st deadline. And so we really just want to thank you all for coming out. But like I said, now we want to stop talking and we want to let you have the floor to let us know, how are you receiving this information? And do you specifically have any suggestions for us as we get into budget conversations and reconciliation of this budget? So time's it. And this is going to be kind of like a open kind of forum. So please come up to the mic because we are recording this. And so let us know what you think. Thank you. Come on up to the mic. Introduce yourself, please. Come on. Come on up.
I'm Chuck Hoven from the Plain Press, and I'm concerned about a little piece of the budget in 1995.
Can I just say one thing? Does
Sure.
everybody have that handout that has more of the details, that has all the details with numbers and stuff like that? So,
Okay.
okay.
Well, in 1995, when some of Cleveland's politicians went downstate and they got a tax exemption for the Browns Stadium. And as part of that deal, they said the Cleveland Public Schools would be held harmless to the property tax that was being exempted. So they agreed that the extracurricular activities in the Cleveland schools would get $2 million a year. And about a little more than a decade ago, Frank Jackson just dropped that down to $1 million. And then a few years later, it was down to $975,000. I think Mayor Bibb brought it up to $1.125 million. But the promise was $2 million. And that is, the legislation was in the July 5th, 1995 city record, 1025A95.
And you say that number again?
1025A-95. And 3 taxes were increased: the parking tax, the motor vehicle leasing tax, and the admissions tax. And those taxes, they bring in maybe 20 to 38 million. The other thing there's 2 other things it can be used for. One is repairs of the Brown Stadium, and that's where the money went. They gave an additional amount that year, and then they kept doing it to the Browns. And the Browns have a surplus in that repair fund. I think last time I looked, it was over 20 million. And that money should have gone to the Cleveland schools and should be returned. Right now, the Cleveland schools next year they'll be facing an $18 million deficit. And if they don't make drastic cuts in 4 years, it'll be over $500 million. So there's a huge problem. You can see what happened to the kids' money, the McKinsey grant. That's because of the pressure being put on the Cleveland schools. And this is just a small thing, and maybe this money could be something that the kids could decide how they could spend it. But it's money that's due, and it's money that's been taken away, and it should be returned. So if you look at that piece of the budget, and it's under the parking, admissions, and the Brown Stadium and the Cleveland, it's called the Comprehensive Extracurriculars Activities Program, CEAP. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think you bring up such a valuable point about having institutional knowledge. You know, I think sometimes, especially being a legislator and understanding the ins and out, people come, people go. But this is the reason why residents who are lifelong Clevelanders are so valuable, right? 1994, I was 14. I don't think about this. You know what I'm saying? And so now I'm in this, we all are in this position to come and try to make decisions. And then I'm like, oh, that is very interesting. And again, if we don't have people at the table to then ask these questions and be like, hold up, let's get the legislative record. Let's figure out, again, and this is one of the things that is so important to understand about legislative intent, right? When something was put in place and how is it going in perpetuity. So again, I really want to, I thank you and I appreciate you from bringing that to light. And it does give us some work to get some things done.
And I'll just add Councilman House Jones. I think this mic is live.
And Councilwoman Santana.
I will just add that it is in the budget right now, the school recreation fund is currently budgeted for 1.125 million this year. But I think that's an incredibly important piece of information about the interplay between these dollars, and it's something we will definitely look into. And thank you very, very much. Oh, go ahead.
I might add, just to say what we're sort of following along with, thank you, Councilwoman. What we're following along with for the, oh gosh, oh, hold on, no, maybe if I spin it this way. Look at that, okay, all right. I think something that we're looking at as well is that currently the funding for the Brown Stadium flows through the general fund budget. So when you think about that other departmental amount, a not insignificant amount of that is, I believe it's an $8 million annual payment essentially on our bonds to pay for the Brown Stadium. And one thing that you hear frequently from the administration is a line about how if there is a future funding deal, it would hold the general fund harmless. And I think it's important for all of us to know that there are certainly mechanisms where you could take that money and not make it flow through the general fund, but that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be something that the city has to pay for. So there's a distinction between what the city has to pay for and what they might pay for through the general fund. So that's certainly something that I'm keeping an eye on as the Browns conversation continues.
Hi, my name is Jana Crosby, and I live over in Ward 1. This is a whole new process for me. I understand the budgeting, I understand all of that stuff, but what I don't understand is how do we as residents, where do we fit at in the budgeting process? I see where the money is, how the money is allocated and so forth, but I don't see where we as residents are benefiting. So I live in Ward 1, like I said before. I see my community is going down, down, down. I see no growth in my community, and it's becoming dark, and it seems like it's starting to die, my community. When I first moved over there 40 years ago, we had life in the community. And when I seen this about the budget, I just wanted to know, because I thought my council person would be here, I wanted to know how is our ward, or where is the money that's being allocated to our ward, where is it going? And how do we see any improvements from the budget? Or could you all tell me where in the budget that it says this money is allocated for Ward 1 and what it's being used for?
Can you go to the slide that divvies up the safety and all that? So this is, how you doing? Good. So that's a very good question. And essentially what we do is when we collect our revenue every year, the majority again coming from income tax, we put it all into the general fund, and then, can you go to the pie graph actually? Pie chart, yeah. Yeah, that right there, okay. So this doesn't, that's fine. This doesn't point to neighborhoods, but the $600 million that goes into police, fire, EMS, street pavement, snow removal, garbage pickup, park and recreation maintenance, the health department, building and housing, all those services are distributed throughout the city. So that police budget, 29.7%, divide that by 5. There are 5 districts. There are 5 police districts in the city of Cleveland. We're in second district right now, you're in
Four.
fourth district.
Yeah.
You're in fourth district, so about 20% of the police budget is in fourth district, patrolling Ward 1. About, I don't know, the fire department I think is set up into, I don't think they have 5. Do they have 5?
They have battalions, yeah.
Battalions.
Yeah.
And so the money is distributed to those departments who then allocate resources throughout the city, typically fairly equally. The population of Cleveland is kind of fairly spread out. The density doesn't change a whole lot, but the Public Works Department there, which is 12.2%, that is paying for everybody's snow plowing. That's paying for everybody's garbage removal. That pays for, everybody's grass cutting at their local park, or, when the pool breaks here and you gotta fix the heating element in the local pool. We don't break up by 17 wards. And it would be an interesting question if we did try to do that. I don't know if we could, because when it comes to 4th District Police, how do you determine how many officers are in each ward when they cover like 3 or 4 wards? We could potentially try to do that and divide the whole budget by 17 and see if that pencils out. But that was just my first thought on it. There was a follow-up thought, but it's escaping me right now. The follow-up is this. Since the city of Cleveland is so dependent on income tax revenue, which is the overwhelming majority of where we get money from, there's really only 2 neighborhoods in Cleveland that collect more revenue than they cost in maintenance fees. And when I mean maintenance fees, I mean what they cost us to pay for police and fire and roads and stuff. And those 2 neighborhoods are downtown and University Circle. And that's because there are big job hubs. Their Key Bank is downtown. I don't know how many thousand people work there, but I think there's gonna be like 4,000 at Sherwin-Williams, right? Those downtown job centers, and then University Circle, the Cleveland Clinic, right? That is where we collect most of our revenue. And in Old Brooklyn, where we are tonight, Old Brooklyn does not pay in taxes what it costs to maintain the neighborhood, right? So we actually are a net receiver of services from the city of Cleveland, while downtown is a net generator. I just put that out there.
Oh, great, go ahead. So, will you come back up to the mic?
So I understand the whole process of breaking it out into the essential services and so forth. Now, what part do our councilmen take in asking for fundings for these various?
Yeah, so can I I want to ask a point of clarification, right? So I heard you said you don't see a benefit to the people. So can I ask a clarifying question of what does benefit look like to you?
I see my community going down, okay? But we're constantly investing monies to fix up our roads, our parks, places where the majority of something that's benefiting the community, for lack of better words. I see that. But I don't see in these allocations, or in our particular ward, there are some things that we need that other areas do not need. If we don't have, I'm sure that you give each council person monies for their particular ward.
And
Monies are not, okay, so see, that's
See,
my
and so this is what I
that's my
wanna-
misconception then.
And so that's why that's why I want to have this conversation. If you don't mind, please indulge me. And this is why I want to get to the heart of so what is the benefit that you want to see so that we can kind of, talk through and think about where or what other government entities may have a larger role in the allocation of it. So I heard you said, I see the parks and recs, but what is benefit look like for you living in Ward 1? Because you said there are things that we need in Ward 1 that other communities may not meet. Can you just, if you can list out a couple of those things, or maybe some of those things? Maybe.
A better infrastructure, or our main roads through Ward 1 is that Lee Harvard area, okay? What could we do to either widen it or do something where there's not so many accidents? Is there something in the budget that we can look at or that we can allocate to that particular area? Or is it something that, is that something at the city of Cleveland level? Or is it the councilman that come in and say, I need you to come in and look at our.
Okay, so,
We're gonna tag team it.
yeah, and now that's what I'm saying. So understanding from your question, when you talk about infrastructure, right? The majority of our infrastructure dollars, they usually come from the state, which is via the federal government, right? And how many local municipalities, how they make those determinations, a lot of times it is through, we have our traffic and engineering, Office of Capital Projects and Repair, and a lot of times we have to compete for them. So there's not just like direct allocations, you actually have to write a grant to get that, right? And I think that's one of the things of us as local elected officials of trying to make sure that we are working with the mayor's office to understand what's the priority. And I wish I could have had it because I was just looking at it today, right? So many of us, all of us actually received, and this is on the infrastructure side as it relates to, it was pipes, it was Cleveland Water Department, and what else was it? And it was streets, right? But many of us, I wish I had a copy of this. You would see, like, it's literally in all of our areas, you're talking about over 1,000 streets. And we get the resources from our own budget to do 7 or 8 of them.
Okay.
Right? And so to supplement that, like, that's where, because we're talking about billion-dollar projects. We just don't have the resources in that way. And that is why we, as local legislators, have to really tighten up our relationships with our state and federal partners. So when those grant announcements come out, we are prepared to compete with them. And then we can communicate to our local, like, people, because some of us are in line to get something this year, but then there are some people that aren't able to get it until 28, 29, 30. And I know a lot of times that communication is lost because we're not communicating to you how this system is working and where we are on the list. So I'm gonna let Councilwoman Moore.
Yeah, I love, it's always hard to follow you, Councilwoman, because you have such like a good arrangement of how things work. The other thing that, when we've had budget conversations in my ward and people have asked similar questions, a big thing that we realized was a misunderstanding is that some of the most tangible stuff that we are all looking for, like improvements to the rec centers, improvements to our parks, that is actually out of a different budget than this budget. It is out of what's called the capital repair budget for the city, and it involves the city issuing bonds and then getting this big influx of cash, like $50 or $60 million. And for years, what's happened at the city is we were kind of dabbling a little bit here and there. Okay, this park gets redone, this rec center gets redone, but you just did not have a number for when Estabrook was gonna get redone, when Earl B. Turner was gonna get done, when Stella Walsh was gonna get done. There was no sort of lineup of how things were going. And I frankly have had people reach out to my office and say, like, you're a bad council person because you can't get Stella Walsh redone in the budget. But the reality is that this is not the budget where Stella Walsh gets redone. And I think something that we're all excited about and that we're encouraging people to continue to engage with is that for the first time in decades, the city is putting together a Parks and Rec master planning document that is going to try to outline how we try to maintain our big city assets using our capital repair dollars. But those are separate from this budgeting process, the vast majority of which goes to salaries for city workers.
And so, and me being a layman, looking at the various categories that you have here, building and housing. So is that the actual buildings and houses?
Yes.
Or is it
See,
just,
this-
wait,
Yeah.
or is it just the human side that runs to make sure that the building and housings within the city?
Bingo, bango, you got
That's so
it.
all we're looking at the budget is the human side of the budget.
Yes.
Okay,
And the
so when I
yes.
come up here and ask the question about, what about the structure and all of that stuff, that's not the question to ask here.
Yeah, I think it's the right question to ask because we want to be answering that question and we need to be able to explain it to people. But I think that is such a great point to just be clear about that this is really the human side. And then those physical investments are done through a different, through a separate process.
Okay.
Who then spend the money, yeah, exactly.
Okay,
And
Yeah.
I'll-
and so within the budget that the mayor or the various departments provide or give to the mayor, do that include any, not human, but physical wants or whatever? Is that, am I saying it correctly?
Yeah.
Is that including hard structures or?
It can, but I think I wanna let Councilwoman Spencer jump in.
I simply wanted to mention, because building and housing is such an important department, and council recently vetted and approved a big piece of legislation to really crack down on, I think, something that is affecting Ward 1 and all of our wards, which are out-of-town investors who do not care about our neighborhoods, who are allowing housing to become dilapidated.
Right.
Councilman Harsh was, I'll just shout you out, incredibly active in helping to craft that piece of legislation. And so this is kind of a breakdown behind us of the people side of building and housing, and you're investing in the people to carry out the work. That division of code enforcement at $9 million a year, we actually want to bump that up. We're going to, with this new piece of legislation, we want more inspections done on the properties. We want the ability to really hold people accountable, give them tickets and fines, and bring them into housing court as needed if they are neglecting their property. So the human talent is so necessary. And by the way, I hope it comes across loud and clear tonight, the city of Cleveland is hiring. There are a lot of job openings. Building and housing is going to have, 30, we're hoping 30 job openings to really help to crack down on irresponsible investors in our neighborhoods. And those are going to be great positions. And so that is part of it is, I hope that helps to answer your question a little bit. And one more thing I want to say to you as well, you've been so amazing in really giving us so much to think about. I will say that Councilman Jones is such a fierce advocate for your community. There is not a council meeting that goes by that Ward 1 is not discussed and at the forefront. And so we're going to pass on that you were here. I would say also for everyone else in the room, in addition to tonight's meeting, there's a public comment period at the beginning of every single council meeting on Monday night. You can sign up starting the Wednesday before. This conversation we've had tonight doesn't just have to be once a year during budget time. If there are priorities or concerns or things that you all want us to hear about, in addition to working directly with your elected representative on council, come down to our public comment on Monday nights and let the full council know what is happening in your neighborhood. The mayor and his staff are there. You have all of our eyes and ears listening to you so we understand the situation.
That's every Monday night?
Every Monday night when we're in session, we have recess a couple times a year, but most of the year we are in session. Go ahead.
I think that's a really great question that you started off with asking about your ward, because I think a lot of times we spend so much time on this and we're so entrenched in this work that we sometimes forget what the 30,000-foot view from a resident looks like. So just to be super clear, we don't divide the budget into 17 pieces that council members then distribute within their ward, right? We don't set up, like Councilman Jones doesn't get his piece of the pie to distribute within his ward. The 17 of us come together and we come up with one budget for the whole city, with all 17 of us being voices at the table. But then I'm going to channel my inner Councilman Slife. We allocate the funds. The administration spends the funds. So when we talk about doing the budget, we talk about how much money we're going to allocate to the recreation department. So the Frederick Douglass Rec Center, right? It's pretty new. It's beautiful. I love it. It's a really nice facility. That wasn't built because city council members allocated the exact dollar amount for that project. That was built because we allocated to the recreation department and probably capital projects, right? MOCAP. So we allocated the funds to those departments who then said, by the way, in the next couple of years, we're going to start building a new rec center, Frederick Douglass Center, down in, is that on Miles? On Miles. And we're going to build that. And so the different departments actually spend the money on people, yes, but they also spend the money on building the stuff. So there is a whole other complicated layer to the budget. Most of us, if we want money and we want to borrow it, we go to the bank and we ask for a loan, right? Take out a loan to buy your house, take out a loan maybe to buy a car, take out a loan to fix a porch, whatever you might need a loan for. When governments need to borrow money, we don't take out loans, we sell bonds. We go to the bond market. And bonds are how we pay for most of these long-term projects. We bond out a lot of our infrastructure, brick and mortar. So this Estabrook was probably built with bond money. I don't know how long ago Estabrook was built, but it was probably built with some bond money. And then we slowly pay it back, just like it makes more sense to borrow the money to buy your house and then pay it off over 30 years. It makes more sense for the city of Cleveland to bond money out for big projects and then pay those bonds out. So one of the things we have to do in the budget every year is allocate money to pay bond debt on projects that were years ago. And like, I'm glad Chuck was here to talk about the agreement in 1995 for the Brown Stadium, because I didn't move to Cleveland until 1998, right? That was before my time, and I'm glad that you can tell me about that, because we are still paying debts for decisions that were made decades ago. And that's not unique to Cleveland. All municipalities, all cities work that way. That's just how cities get money through the bond market. But again, we allocate the funds to the department, who then decide on the physical projects that you see.
And I will add this, because I know I heard you said, well, he doesn't have does my councilman get a portion of funds that he can allocate directly to Ward 1? I will tell you what that is. It is called casino dollars. And we get it, it's about $93,000 a year that each each person, and this is exactly, and I want you to talk about, so casino dollars are allocated, each council person gets around $93,000 is from casino revenue. We get it on a quarterly basis. And it's around, no. It's 23, 25-ish, I'm saying. And again, that goes up and down. It's just based on the revenues of the casino. But we get it on a quarterly basis, and catch this. A lot of it, the way that it is designed now, and at least the most of us, it's a lot of people have been working on not to get it reimbursable, because it has been a pain in the neck, right? You know, a lot of times, even if it's the recreation center, the kids want to go, or they got to the championship somewhere and they traveling somewhere. The way the casino dollars are set up is, they have to spend the money first, and then we're going to give them back. We know most of our communities are not set up that way. If we want to give the $5,000 to the Muni League or to the arts program or to the seniors that want to take their little trip to the Amish country, we have been so hands tied, and we've really been trying to find a way, working with the administration, to figure out how do we invest in our communities with the small dollars that we have. So the disposable, or that's in our control, that we really can say, do this, it is very, very limited. Many of us are continually trying to figure out, are there other things that we can do in the separate budget, which I think hopefully my council members can see how valuable this is to go talk to community people about, like, having these opportunities to talk after we do the community block development grant dollars. That's another source of funds. Again, that comes through the federal government. There are a lot of stringent requirements, as you are talking about what is happening for community development, economic development, bringing homeowners back into our communities. A lot of that goes through the community block development grant dollars, and hopefully council will have the opportunity to come back out, talk about what we're doing, what are those benefits to community members when you look at home repair, things of that nature. Those things are not in this line item, it's a different one, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to come out to talk specifically about that. And if not, come back and talk about it, have information available to show the demonstration of how your community as well as others are benefiting.
And so to talk, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
But we are.
And so when you talk about the casino dollars, do you all here decide how it comes back here to be allocated?
You want to tell them the split?
Or it do it
Each
go
way to admin?
directly to each council person?
Yeah, great question. So we don't get all the casino revenue in city council. We split it with the administration. Whenever we say the administration, we just mean the mayor, right? The mayor is the administration. The administration is the mayor. The mayor gets, what is the split, 75%?
85-15.
85, the mayor gets 85% of casino revenue to spend as he or she sees fit in the city of Cleveland. City council splits the other 15% 17 ways, okay? I would like to introduce you to Councilman Richard Starr.
Listen, You better say that. But see, this is the thing where we want people to know what is going on so that we can truly advocate and understand how things are structured. Be clear, casino dollars are basically a relatively new source of funds, right? And we have had a little experience, and if people are like, well, wait a minute, hold on, we want to do something else with it, we absolutely can look at opportunities to change. But understand now, because we have created a system, right, that funds some of the people and departments. And if we make a transition from it, as we move that away, understanding how it's gonna cut and stuff. I think somebody else had a question over here. Anybody? No? But exactly. Your face.
So the 93,000 roughly that we each get per year in casino revenue, council members can spend that, I would say, as they see fit, but there's severe restrictions on it. So I'll give you an example of my casino revenue. We each have one executive assistant, one person that works for us full-time, and with 25,000 people in the ward, it often is too much work for one person. So I have a part-time person. She's an older lady, she's retired, this is her retirement job, and she works about 15 hours a week, and I pay for her with the casino revenue. I also paid to add walking path lights to a park in the neighborhood. Now, it's a park that is part of the city's, regular parks and recreation budget, but I wanted them to put nighttime walking lights because people walking their dogs didn't feel comfortable cutting through this park at night, and I want the neighbors to feel like they can walk their dogs through the park. So that project took up more than a year's worth of casino revenue. We don't just spend all the casino revenue the month it comes in. Sometimes we save up for projects that we know a lot of people in the neighborhood. I had dozens of people tell me about how dark this park was, and for a lot of reasons it needed to be done. So I saved up some casino revenue and spent it on that project, and it's more than 1 year provides. So there's a whole other aspect that we started talking about at the beginning called Community Development Block Grant, CDBG funds, are federal funds. They are the most restricted funds that any of us talk about in the budgeting process. It's a separate budget because the federal government has so many restrictions, but most of you are probably aware of some community development corporations, some CDC in your neighborhood. CDCs exist in Cleveland in part because they've gotten good at figuring out how to handle federal regulations, and the federal government does allow us to use that money for community improvement projects. So most CDCs in Cleveland are funded with a lot of those, which are more of a local. I fund the Old Brooklands Community Development Corporation, and so does Councilwoman Moore, because we actually share a big section of Old Brooklyn. So she funds some of them, I fund some of them, and so those CDCs get some of that money. But I just want to put that out there because you're right, it's an 85-15 split of casino funds, and there are members of council who would really like to see that number change.
I was gonna look for the behind the scenes, it shows casino on there.
It's
Our income slide, and we were trying to see, so casino was under other, so it's a relatively small piece of income for the city. This has been fantastic. And Chuck, do you have another question?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Question is, where does the water department fit in? We have them collecting fees for garbage collection, and where does that revenue come into your pie chart? And
Are you ready?
I'll take it. So the water department is what's one of our enterprise funds. So that means that it essentially, it funds itself through the revenue that it generates. So those water department fees that you pay can only go into the water department.
except the garbage fee, where does that go?
Oh, the garbage,
There's a waste collection,
yes, line item.
line item on your water bill.
Right, where
Yes.
does that money go? And who gets
That
it?
goes
Who
to the
gets it?
general fund for division of waste.
Does it?
Yes, it should be for waste and recycling.
Yeah.
And where
We need to
does it
figure
come
that.
into your chart?
That would be on, and I will try to flip to the right page, but I think it would be under,
Revenues.
miscellaneous or, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's so essentially it's a charge, it could be a charge for service. So the water bill is used as the mechanism to bring in, or to, it's a fee, I guess you could say. It's a waste collection fee, but all the water bill does, it's sort of like piggybacking on there to collect that fee.
I mean, it used to come out of property tax and payroll tax, and then all of a sudden they put it on the water bill. And I think that really hurts low-income people. Let me ask another question.
Okay.
Okay, do you do a cost-benefit analysis on the abatements and the TIFs in terms of, we have, and not just the city's portion. I mean, the city, you're looking at a small part, but what is the total amount of abatements each year? And over time, how does it affect the school system? How does it affect the libraries, the county? We're talking about kids being housed in a office building downtown, and that's county money that is part of the property tax and the metro parks. So what happens when these revenue streams don't go to these organizations? We're looking at huge deficits in the Cleveland schools. And what happens over time when kids don't have that smaller classroom? What's going on with, we've got hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate going up with zero going to the Cleveland schools. And then I go to Cleveland school budget hearing, and they're telling me that their local property tax revenue increases by less than 0.5%. So you're talking about when this stuff comes off after 15 years, there's so many other houses that have been knocked down or reduced in value by the time those come out that they're getting 0.5%. It doesn't even keep up with their 9% a year healthcare costs, the wage increases. So what you do affects all these other entities. It's not just that little piece, well, the city, we're not going to lose it, we'll give the abatement. It's everybody else is getting affected too.
Thank you so much. And I think a few of us have comments. This is such an important topic. I would feel differently about it. We did, I think it was unfortunately long overdue that the city reformed its tax abatement policy. It finally, a reformed tax abatement policy has finally gone into effect as of December 31, 2023. So, but it is a lukewarm, yes, I agree with you that it could have done a lot more. But for too long, we were giving limitless abatements. So if you wanted to build $1 million home, you could get $1 million abated for 15 years, not pay any taxes. If you could afford to build $1 million home, we would allow you to not pay any property taxes on that home for 15 years, okay? That was under the old policy. Under the new policy, the city is broken out into market areas and areas that where we're trying to invite more investment, have a more generous policy. So for example, for a single family home, and this is still a really big number to almost everyone I know, but up to $450,000, you can still get abated in the market areas like Ward 1, where we want to see more investment. In areas like my neighborhoods in Ward 15, I forgot to, when I introduced myself earlier, I forgot to mention I serve Ward 15 on council, which are the Detroit Shoreway, Edgewater, and Cadell neighborhoods. And many parts of my ward, the market has become overheated, so you can only get up to $350,000 abated. So really trying to modify, but it's really been, I mean, it was long overdue and a little bit too little too late. So I think, Chuck, I mean, this is something that the community does need to be aware of, is that most of the new construction you see out there is not paying property taxes for the first 15 years of its lifespan at all in this city. And I had not contemplated the fact that there are other push-pull factors in what the schools ultimately get. I will transition to another colleague only to end by saying that TIFs, tax increment financing, is a different kind of tool that's used to subsidize real estate development. And in theory, we're holding the schools harmless. So TIFs are different than abatement. Abatement, schools do not get any revenue for 15 years. With a TIF, they're called non-school TIFs, and schools are still supposed to get their share of the property taxes. But I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
But I'll defer to somebody else. I think that's a really, really important question, because abatements and TIFs are project-centered. Whenever they come before council, they say, we want to do this project in this location, it's going to cost this much money, and we're asking city council to give us this abatement or this TIF. And these go back 20, 30 years, so we weren't all on the council, but they've gone to council. And council members, typically in the Committee of Development, Planning, and Sustainability, hear those requests and decide on a per-project basis whether or not to grant that. And then every council person afterwards inherits those agreements. So those are not budgetary decisions. When we do the annual budget, we aren't reviewing whether or not, we aren't reviewing abatements and TIFs. That's not part of the budget process. It's a per-project decision that members of council make as needed when they come requesting. So, for instance, I moved to Tremont in 2001, and I lived there when they were building a lot of the new condominiums that went up in that neighborhood that were all on abatements. I moved out of Tremont in 2008. But since then, all those are fully online. We call it online. It means their abatement's over, they're paying taxes. And so the idea was that those projects couldn't happen without the abatement. You can say they could, you could argue it, but when the abatement expires, full taxes kick in, and the argument has always been that it's better to get the project up and running. But I just want to be clear that those aren't budget issues for us to figure out. Those are per projects decisions that council members make, and it doesn't impact our budget decisions when we're looking at what's available to us, because what's available to us is collected, right? And we can't change what we're able to collect on. So you're correct that abatements do affect collections down the road, but when we're looking at the budget, the finance director says, here's how much money we collected last year, and that's the only information we can use when allocating the budget, because we can't go over.
And but I do want to add this to the point.
Oh.
But because you asked, do we do a cost-benefit analysis on TIFs? The answer is no. I'm going to be very clear. We do not. And again, what you are bringing up is the reason why, we should, right? This information should be made publicly available to people so that people can have a broader understanding. Let the public really, because we've been doing a lot of these one-off projects, right? Some of us are here, and like I said, elected officials come and go, but the people always remain. You see what I'm saying? And if we're not equipping community members with this knowledge, it is hard to hold people accountable that come and go. You see what I'm saying? So I feel like it is on us to really think at tools. And we have begun to have this conversation, right? This big legislation, shore to core to shore is coming out, this big lakefront thing. They want a big TIF. And we have been engaged in some initial conversations about if this has been happening in other cities and communities like this, show us the documentation on how this is proven to be beneficial and to what extent, because your beneficial might not be my misbeneficial. You see what I'm saying? So again, we got to kind of level set, but I did want to not answer your question. And again, that is probably a message for us of thinking about how do we incorporate these things to show value to the community. And like I said, it is very subjective, but.
It is subjective, because I could actually argue the other side and say that, yes, we do a cost-benefit analysis, but it happens at the table when that project is proposed. So
Have you ever turned down a project that wanted an abatement?
For TIFs?
how many have we
An
had?
abatement,
I don't know that we've had many.
Well, abatement, you qualify.
it's automatic for an abatement, so it's.
Yeah,
automatic.
it was
not
baked in
somehow-
previous
TIF,
legislation.
So you're not considering it.
But and I think, but what he's bringing to the table though is a lot of things that people promise. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
And there are a lot of things that people, because it is supposed to be a benefit, right? People say, the market is going to improve.
Right.
We're going to bring this many jobs. We're going to add this much amount to the property tax base. And a lot of times we do not have a clear understanding if people are fulfilling the promises at the moment that they said they were going to do at the point of legislation, and it's not publicly available. So what you are saying, that is the cost benefit of analysis, because the reason why we're doing it is because people say it's going to be a benefit. And we should be able to, at any moment in time, based on what people said, even if it was from 1995, should be able to say it's working or not. So thank you for that.
I have one more thing to add.
Okay.
And you all are helping us do our jobs better. This is what tonight is all about. But what I want to say, one more thing in response to Chuck's question, another new piece of legislation that was approved in the past year is a brand new it's called a community benefits ordinance for the city. Now, if you receive a certain scale of subsidy, if you're a real estate investor, developer, and you receive a significant subsidy from the city of Cleveland, like a TIF, like tax increment financing, now you have to adhere to a much more rigorous set of how are you going to be giving back to the community, including things such as MBE, FBE employment, or use of minority-owned or women-owned firms for your subcontractors, meeting certain benchmarks with that. Our council colleague, Richard Starr, we did approve a TIF, but he had a very detailed community benefits agreement. He had including subsidizing a daycare and other factors that he included. So I think we have turned a corner in terms of how we're not just passing out TIFs like candy like we have in the past.
Yeah, I'm glad to see the community benefits agreements in place. I think sometimes I look at these big projects and I say, well, if we were collecting the revenue, and a lot of them would have been built anyhow, with or without the abatement, I believe. And if even a percentage of them were built, you could take that revenue from the property tax and you look at like Glenville, lost 5,000 people in the last 10 years. You go down 123rd and you'll see apartment buildings that are totally empty and abandoned by the landlords. Those kinds of things could be prevented with some revenue that the city had in like a benefits agreement.
I can give you an example. By the way, I just have to say this. It's housekeeping really quick. It is 7 after 7. The rec center closes at 7:30. That gives the staff here time to push the broom and do the things they need to do. So we have about 20 minutes, and I want to encourage anybody else. But I can give you a good example of a TIF that was not granted in a project that didn't happen because of it. It was the Nexus project on the parking lot next to the Q downtown. They wanted to do a school TIF. They wanted to do a TIF that included the schools. And it was CEO Gordon at the time went around the community, had a whole bunch of public meetings to get feedback. At the end of the day, there was no appetite to grant the TIF. That project did not happen. So that's a good example of how sometimes TIFs don't happen. Now that was just it comes to mind because it was a really highly talked about. But projects that don't happen are hard to point at, right? It's hard to point at something that didn't happen and say, oh, that didn't happen, right? You're basically pointing at any empty space. However, I think that the cost-benefit analysis for those things happens by people at the table, and there's always a question, to Councilwoman House Jones' point, about whether or not we're making the right decision. So I think that Tremont looked very different when I moved there than it does now. Tremont was a bit of a ghost town in the late 90s. There wasn't a lot happening. It was kind of a hard scrabble part of town. I drove a yellow cab, and there used to be a code that you would call into to the dispatch if you had to cross the river to the west side because things were so crazy over there. They'd put a car to trail you, to keep an eye on you while you were on West 25th and Tremont area. And they started doing a bunch of abatements and developing a bunch of upscale housing in that neighborhood. And the neighborhood's changed dramatically. Whether or not Tremont is successful, I suppose you could argue. I think most people would think that Tremont is a better off space now than it was 20-some years ago. And a lot of that development happened because of abatements, but those were project decisions made by council members at that time. And I think that's just what I want to point out, because those are the sort of the daily grind of the job. We're constantly presented with a decision that we have to decide, is this good for the community? Is this good long-term? Is it good short-term? Sometimes, is it better to sacrifice $1 tomorrow so that we can get 3 the day after? That's usually a good idea. And there's a lot of thinking that goes on like that in the job. But again, that's stuff that sort of happens throughout the year at the table and not necessarily the annual budget allocation.
The problem is that the people in Tremont that were low income, that were paying their property tax,
Yep.
they couldn't afford to live there.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because CMSD only experiencing a 0.5% increase in their revenue. Just so that everybody knows, council does not oversee Cleveland Municipal School District. That is entirely under control of the mayor. Since when but
The abatements you do control.
but the county, yeah, but the county does 3-year value assessments. Every 3 years, Cuyahoga County revalues property assessments, and that's when your property value goes up or down. So for the 3 years in between, they hardly ever change. So
Under state law, the Cleveland schools can't benefit from that unless there's a levy. That was passed under Voinovich administration.
So their collections don't go up because they're collecting a millage, right? And the millage adjusts to the operating levy. Correct. So they're not going to go up a lot in between. There's going to be a marginal difference.
But they would benefit if there was new property coming online that was paying property tax.
They benefit from new property tax, which a lot of, those old abated projects now pay.
15 years.
Yeah, so okay, I'm gonna interject just a quick, y'all have any questions? Or y'all just taking it in?
We want to get to
They
you.
said they be taking it in. So I did. So I do want to say, and this is the other thing too, I think just in a context of our city, right? As we talk about, infrastructure that is not necessarily maintained the way we would like for it to do. Understanding that, Cleveland was originally designed for a population of 1 million. We got 375,000 people now. That's a significant difference. Yes. And so when we see like all of this blightedness and we figuring out how to make an investment and let's fix this pipe, but those 10 pipes are leaking too. We are at a time phrase, and this council, what we have in front of us are really how are we making some adjustments, understanding what our reality will be literally for the next generation. How many, what do we foresee our growth to be as a city? And then how do we make budget adjustments to that reality and communicate it to people in a way that they can understand? Because I have been a voice that we just got too much stuff. We just got too much stuff that we cannot maintain. And coming up with a strategy to deal with that reality, because it's going to be a long time again before Cleveland gets to a place of having 1 million people. That is something that I can almost be for certain of.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think European planners have a concept they call degrowth, and they just admit in certain cities that they are not growing. They are declining.
Youngstown did
and
that.
losing population. And you plan for the people that are already here
Yeah.
and try to make the best living space for them rather than constantly seeking newcomers and giving away your taxpayers.
Youngstown dug up a bunch of streets. They had roads they knew were not going to be needed. They moved the last few people off the block and actually took out the bulldozers and dug up the streets so they never have to maintain it again. Detroit built a 100-acre forest in the middle of their city because they knew they had more land than they needed. So they're growing oak trees, figuring that it's a 100-year investment, right? Because oak grows slow, but it's a fantastic wood. And I think that's a great point. And I think to the councilwoman's point, we do have to decide what our strategy is. I don't think there are many people that want to embrace managed decline. I don't think that there's a moral, emotional tug of war. I think most of us want to imagine Cleveland stabilizing and potentially rebounding from a low of 300 something. But what we do know is that there are forces at play on Earth and in America and in Ohio that will impact us that we do not control, and we will end up responding to those forces on some level. I just read a fantastic book, I got to plug it, it's called Octopus Hunting, a local Clevelander, Richie Paparinen. He's a demographer, I hate that word. He studies population growth and trends, and he particularly studies population growth and trends in the Rust Belt cities. Cleveland is one of them. And he talks about how cities have birth and death cycles, and Cleveland had a birth cycle and a death cycle, and at some point we will do this again, because what we can guarantee is that next year we won't have the exact same number of people as we had this year. It will not be exact. It will go up a little or down a little. And the question is, where do we build the city for the people who live here? And I think that's a great point. I think a lot of us want to focus more on making the quality of life good for Cleveland residents rather than trying to be the next Paris, right?
Well, good. Well, thank you all so much for coming here. I think, this is like a pilot. We wanted to do a little target just to see if it works. So do you think this is something that council should do again? Okay, and again, this is a wide, this is a good sample. So again, just thank you all so much for giving us your time and your feedback. We definitely will share this with our colleagues, and we look forward to prayerfully doing more of this throughout the city.
Thanks, y'all.